So we'll be moving along to reports in 4.01. We have the report card, and welcome Mr. Cooper and Mr. Meisner.
Good evening, President Meyer, Vice President Levan, members of the board, Ms. Marshall, and Ms. Hamburg. Mr. Meisner will actually be joining me later on here with any questions that the board may have. All right, so bear with me as we work through the technology here and making sure that we have everything appropriately shared out there. I did share the presentation with the board, so if you have access to take a look at that, you have the paper copy there as well. So it's my pleasure to provide this report to you this evening on the most recent state report card for Westerville City Schools. The annual report card is one piece of district data that we review each year to reflect and consider any necessary changes and to give us a good measure of how things are going for our students and our staff. I do want to note that as we do each year with this report, that in many cases the data comes from a specific test on a specific day of the year. While we do consider and reflect on this data, we also collect multiple points of data regarding student progress to ensure our students are meeting state expectations and the standards at each grade level. So the 25-26 state report card continues to use the STAR rating system, which took the place of the letter grade system with the 21-22 state report card. 6 component areas are rated: achievement, progress, gap closing, graduation rate, early literacy, and college, career, workforce, and military readiness. The college, career, workforce, and military readiness, which is oftentimes abbreviated CCW-MR, is a newly rated component this year. While the component has been on the report card since 21-22, this is the first year for it to receive a STAR rating. So overall, Westerville did receive an overall 3.5 star rating by the state, which means we continue to meet the state's expectations. That 3.5 stars overall is down from an overall 4-star rating last year. In reviewing the details of our results on this report card, I will say the margin between our 3.5 stars this year and 4 stars is extremely thin. In the following slides, I'll actually share information with you about each component and just how close the district was to being at 4 stars overall. So this chart shows the 6 components that were measured on the report card. Calculating the overall score is not as simple as how many stars times the weighted percentage. So we can see there that achievement and progress are each weighted 25% of the overall score on the report card. And then the other 4 measures, progress, gap closing, early literacy, graduation, and the CCW-MR rating are all 12.5% of the total weight. So one would think that you just take the number of stars, times the certain percentage, and then that would get you to your overall, but that actually is not how it's calculated. So within most of the components, there are multiple levels within each star rating that correspond to a decimal score that then contributes to an overall decimal score and a final star rating. So as you can see here, the 24-25 results, when you calculate the decimals corresponding to our ratings on each of those 6 measures, we have a decimal final score of 3.094. It's not 3.1 stars though. You actually then take that 3.094 and you put that into the chart for the score ranges to then determine the overall rating of the district. And anything between the 2.625 and 3.124 technically is 3.5 stars. So when we look at our score being 3.094, we were just shy of that 3.125 that's required for the overall 4-star rating. So 0.031 points, if you're counting at home with that math there, from being as an overall 4-star district. Moving forward, I do want to highlight again the CCW-MR is new for this year as we look at the calculations. Last year's overall calculation was actually done off of the 5 components with the weighted percentages that are displayed up there. So achievement and progress were 28.601% of the weighted percentage overall. The graduation rate, gap closing, and early literacy were 14.266% each going into the final. So when we look, though, at what our rating this year's scores and results with last year's calculations, we would have had a decimal rate of 3.286, which would have been the overall 4 stars. So if we take our same results this year and were to use last year's calculations, we would have been an overall 4-star district. So we would have maintained that 4-star rating as a district. So once again, the comparison between the two charts, just to give you an idea of just how close we were with that. Again, we're fully meeting state expectations, and I would argue that we're beyond the state expectations as the 4 stars is exceeding expectations. So 3 stars meets the expectations, 4 stars exceeding expectations. We were at 3.5 stars final rating. So the first component I want to take a look at here is the achievement rating. The district was 4 stars overall. We did exceed state standards with our 4 stars in this component. This component of achievement measures student performance on 20 different state assessments, the ELA, math, science, and social studies areas across the various grade levels from 3rd grade up through high school. Points are awarded based on the performance levels, with higher levels earning more points. The performance levels of limited and basic do not demonstrate proficiency, while the other levels of proficient, accomplished, advanced, and advanced plus count as meeting or exceeding the state's expectations. So each student's performance level then contributes to the district's overall performance index. I want to highlight with our next slide here, just zooming in on that PI trend, or with that performance index trend. So again, all of those results end up going into a formula that creates the performance index. And as you can see here, our 5-year trend that is highlighted on the report card shows that we continue to make progress and improvement moving up on our performance index overall as a district. So in 2021, that report card showed us at a 70.7, followed by an 86.1, 87.9, 89.1, and now this year, 89.7. So we're very proud of the achievement that continues to move up over time. Within the next component, progress, again, this was an area where we had 4 stars and exceeded the state standards. The progress measure evaluates student growth over time, regardless of the initial achievement level. This compares students' actual progress to their expected progress. So you may be familiar with the phrase value added within the progress component. The state uses an outside contractor to provide a predictive modeling approach to determine the levels where students should be able to perform based on their previous performance. This is a very complicated measure, as you might guess, and one that is pretty outside of our control for the expectation of what that measure should be, as we don't know where students are expected to perform. The state does not give us that measure of where should they perform at the end of the year, what will you need to get to that value added that's expected or exceeds state expectations. It's simply a measure that the state looks at after the fact, essentially, to tell us where we met progress and where we didn't meet progress. But at the end of the day, that progress measure, again, we had 4 stars overall as a district and exceeded that state standard, which means our staff, our teachers, our students are doing a great job with their continual growth year to year.
I just kind of want to highlight that, Mark. So this one means that we are actually exceeding the expected growth for a year. So our kids are growing more than a year in a year, which is this, to me, is a huge measure in terms of because it takes into account where the kids are starting, whereas achievement does not. So kudos to our staff for that one.
On the third component, gap closing, this focuses on closing achievement gaps among various student groups that are identified by the state. For example, race, economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, and our English learners. Points are awarded based on the gap closing performance. This component focuses on closing achievement gaps among various student groups. Points are awarded based on multiple indicators within this component. So specifically, when we look at one of those areas that are measured within the gap closing component, one example is the comparison of subgroups within the district based on the state-determined goal, and in this case, it's English Language Arts achievement. So the state looks at specifically all of our subgroups and in the English Language Arts achievement category. The gold circle represents the state's goal, and each bar represents a subgroup of our students and where they performed compared to the state goal. So as you can see there, this graph shows 7 of our 9 subgroups met or exceeded the state's goals for English Language Arts. So therefore, we got 7 out of the 9 points in the gap closing measure overall for this specific measure of English Language Arts. Another example would be the math achievement. So again, you see the same 9 subgroups here. And with this one, once again, that gold circle represents the state's goal, and each bar represents a subgroup of our students and where they performed compared to the state goal. So as you can see, that red bar at the top indicates that our white non-Hispanic students performed well beyond that gold circle, which is the state expectation. And again, looking at each of our subgroups and where they performed. This graph shows 8 of our 9 subgroups met or exceeded the state's goals for math. So again, we would have gotten 8 out of the 9 potential points in this category. Another part of the gap closing that I do want to discuss a bit here tonight is to take a moment to discuss another measure being chronic absenteeism. So this is a measure that results in all or nothing points. You either earn all 5 points within this measure, or you earn 0 points within this measure. And so in the 23-24 school year, our students displayed a 17.9% chronic absenteeism rate. And I'll go into the definition of that in just a bit. But we earned all 5 points on the state report card in this measure last year. When we take a look at this year, the 24-25 school year, but this year's report card, it was at 17.8% chronic absenteeism rate. However, we earned 0 points. So when we take a look at the state's chart here, the state actually has a moving measure on this. And so there's a goal that by the 2030-31 school year, that the chronic absenteeism rate will be at 5%. So when we look at last school year, that rate was 18.3%. And again, if you look at our result from last year, it was 17.9. So we met the goal and we got all 5 points. This year, that goal is 16.4%. That's highlighted there in the orange, and we had 17.8. So even though we did a touch better, we actually scored 0 points for this measure. That will continue to change over time. I will note that districts can still meet the expectation. There is a caveat to these rules, as there are in many cases. And in this case, if a district reduces their overall chronic absenteeism rate by 3% of their previous year's rate, then you also can meet the expectation, but we didn't decrease by that much either. So with that said, I do want to highlight a little bit more about this, because 1 point in this area, so just a partial point in this area, perhaps saying, hey, the district maintained or actually did better than the previous year, so maybe earning a partial point for this, would have still resulted in 4 stars in the gap closing component. But as I indicated earlier, there are different levels and different decimals that are earned for the overall. And we would have jumped a bit. We would have still been 4 stars, but we would have jumped into the next smaller decimal table, and therefore would have been 4 stars overall as a district. So again, when I talk about how close we were to being 4 stars overall as a district, this is an indication of just how close that was. Just 1 point out of the 5 for perhaps just maintaining our rate would have gotten us to that point. So what is the definition of chronic absenteeism? So chronic absenteeism is defined as students who miss more than 10% of the total school hours. You would think for unexcused absences, but it's actually for excused or unexcused absences. So when we think about that, we fully recognize that many of our students may need to miss school for medical or illness reasons. Perhaps they have a fever, they can't come to school for 24 hours after that fever has broken. Family trips during the school year may also be very excellent educational experiences for our kids. And we know that those are all reasons as to why a student may be excused from school. Unfortunately, the state counts these absences in this measure against us. So missing just 2 school days per month on average results in a student being chronically absent. So this is an area where families, I will say, can really help the district by ensuring students are in school whenever possible. We absolutely want our students to be taken care of from their health and safety, and we want those educational experiences that a family may say, hey, I want to take my student to this country or this state and have them explore the educational opportunities that can be certainly gathered from a family trip like that. But we just want to note that this is one of those areas where, if possible, in scheduling routine doctor's visits, family trips, if those can happen outside the school day or during school breaks, that would be a huge help to us in helping specifically with this chronic absenteeism measure. So once again, just want to kind of highlight specifically one of those areas and how we did in that area, but how that area impacted our overall score. Looking at another component in this measure, or in the overall report card, was the graduation rate. We did have 4 stars and exceeded the state standards for this area. Graduation rate assesses the percentage of students who graduate within 4 or 5 years. Points are awarded based on that graduation rate. The 4-year graduation rate is 60% of the overall graduation rating. And 5-year graduation rate is 40% of the graduation rating. So those are the weighted percentages that go together to create that district graduation rate rating. We did have a 93.9% graduation rate in the 24-25 school year. Last year, that rate was 94%. And these 2 rates, 93.9 and 94%, are the highest graduation rates the district has had in about 20 years. So again, our students are achieving. Thank you. It is definitely powerful information as to work that goes into supporting our kids every day, our teachers, our additional supports, our job coaches, our academic enrichment center. So much goes into helping our students to be successful in earning that diploma and being ready for their college, career, workforce, or military, if so be it that that is their choice. And I'll talk about that measure in just a bit. Moving on to the next component, early literacy. This is an area where we were rated 2 stars, and as the state would note, there being an area where we need support. The early literacy component is an area where we absolutely have some work to do and we want to do to improve. I do want to note the very tight margin that kept us from 3 stars for this component. So the overall calculation, when you dig into all the technical documents that the state has when we look at, the earned calculation of this measure was 67.5%. We earned 67.5% when you look at our 3rd grade reading proficiency, which was a 40% of the weighted measure, promotion to 4th grade, which was 35% of the measure, and improving K-3 literacy, which was 25% of the measure. That's how you get to the 100% of the overall measure. And we earned a calculation of 67.5. The mark for 3 stars in this category is 68%. So it's obvious there's no rounding up happening with things, but 67.5%, so we were 0.5% off of being 3 stars in this specific area. And as you can guess, that 3 stars would have knocked us up once again to an overall 4 stars for the district. So what is that 0.5% difference in this area? I would like to note that the state did move in this 40% 3rd grade reading proficiency. When we look at that reading proficiency, there is the 3rd grade ELA assessment. And so it's not the overall English language arts assessment, but they actually look at the subscore of reading. So there's a reading subscore within that assessment. And that benchmark is 50 points. To get 50 points to be able to meet the benchmark and be proficient in that reading measure specifically. Last year, the state's mark was 48. And so once again, this is an area where the state has moved the measure for us. 44 of our students, of the 1,121 students that were tested, scored a 49. And the most recent results with last year's expectations would have resulted in 3 stars on this measure, had 13 students of the 44 earned that subscore. So if they earned one more point, 13 students out of 1,121 that were tested, then we would have earned that 3-star rating. So once again, very tight, very close margins of being able to be at that next level. Another item that we are continuing to review in this measure when we look at that improving K-3 literacy. I'll skip over the promotion to 4th grade, but quite honestly, we earned all 35% there. 99.9% of our students were promoted from 3rd grade to 4th grade this past year. The improving K-3 literacy is another area that we are tracking closely. We are continuing to review the assessment that is used for this. So the district chooses its assessment for this specific measure. We currently use the iReady literacy assessment, and that measure is used then that we report to the state for these results of this 25%. So it is a self-reported measure. There are multiple assessments that can be used for this measure, and there may be some better options than the iReady, as it is intended to be a comprehensive measure of the grade level expectations. And the point of the iReady is to help our teachers to identify areas where individual students may need the most amount of support as we go through the year. So in envisioning this, our students come in, let's say 1st grade, they come in, they're assessed in the first week of school as to where they are on the iReady, and it is measuring their standards for the entire 1st grade year. So we're talking about students who are 6 years old coming in and demonstrating that they have met all the expectations for the whole 1st grade year. So it's a great assessment for us from a diagnostic standpoint to be able to know where our students are, but it's not so great of a measure to use when we're talking about the state saying, hey, we're gonna grab that and say, oh, all these students are off track. And one would expect that most students are off track coming into 1st grade, that they're not meeting end of year 1st grade expectations. There are assessments that are out there that we want to continue to look at. We are talking with some of our similar districts, as well as some of the other districts in the area, to determine what assessments they are using, not just from a standpoint of, hey, what assessment helps you to show the accurate amount of students on track to start their 1st grade or 2nd or 3rd grade year, or kindergarten for that matter. But really trying to find a measure that is helpful to our teachers in understanding where our students are and how we can support them to meet grade level expectations. So this is one that, one could probably argue about the various assessments that are there. At the end of the day, this measure counts on the district report card based off of our results on this specific assessment. I also want to note that with that as well, Ms. Toma and Ms. Kate Toma will be presenting information after my presentation here tonight. It'll be a little shorter for you, but it'll be all about MTSS. And so we use the assessment results for our iReady assessments to help us determine students that need additional support in addition to what's happening in the classroom. So more about that on the MTSS measures in just a bit. So what assessments maybe are out there? As we consider some assessments to use, there are a certain number of assessments that are approved by the state. iReady is one of them. We also got word recently with some state legislative changes, and as you can see here, a note dated from the state's website of September 3rd, that there will be upcoming changes to district and school reading diagnostic assessments. iReady is one of those that we currently use. So as it states here, beginning in the 26-27 school year, that's next year, the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce is required to make significant changes to its approved list of reading diagnostic assessments. Under upcoming changes to Ohio law, the department must approve up to 5 reading diagnostic assessments aligned with the academic standards for each grade from kindergarten to grade 3 by June 30th of 2026. So with that said, we must wait until the state approves up to 5, so it may be 1, it may be 3, up to 5 assessments restricted there, that they will tell us what we can use that then contributes to this measure. With that said, they have until June 30th, so beyond the end of this school year, and the district must implement one of those 5 approved assessments, if there are 5, a few months later to start the next school year, as in mid-August of 2026. So this is going to be a very tight timeline for us. It is one that we will be exploring various assessments that can currently be used and anticipate potentially, hopefully they'll make that decision well before June 30th. We don't always get that time to consider it, but it may be a quick decision if that is a later decision that happens, and we'll have to move forward quickly in purchasing potentially new assessments for our students.
And Mark, how much funding do we anticipate getting to purchase those assessments?
I will talk about unfunded mandates later. But
we
certainly it is one
But
of
we have a
those. It
contract
is.
with our current vendor,
Right.
right? So, I mean, that's a piece of, just to point out the types of things that we're trying to deal with to make sure we have a good assessment for our students and for our teachers. At the same time, we're under a contract and we are expecting zero funding to pay for that.
That is correct. To our knowledge, there is no funding that comes with this potential change for school districts. And again, it may or may not be a measure that is helpful for us, looking at our students locally and what our students need and what our teachers believe is useful to them as they work with our students throughout the year. So the final measure, as I noted earlier, this is a newly rated component, the CCW-MR, College, Career, Workforce, and Military Readiness. We did have a 2-star rating as our initial rating for this year, which again is noted as the state of needing support. This area does assess the percentage of students who meet the post-secondary readiness components. I will say, as a district, we fully believe in ensuring our students are ready for college, a career, the workforce, or the military. And quite honestly, as we look at our Portrait of a Graduate that has existed and been a big community effort for our students, it exists because of our belief in preparing our students for their future beyond graduation. We also believe that all students who have demonstrated readiness should count in this measure. Unfortunately, many students who were indeed ready for their path ahead were not accounted for in the state's measure. So as we look here, we do have some graphs. The blue graphs are specifically areas that count, according to the state, as measures that will qualify a student to be considered ready for college, career, the workforce, or the military. The state looks at 11 specific areas. So the grayed out areas are reported, but they do not count toward the measure. So students who receive an honors diploma, an industry recognized credential, dual enrollment credit, the ACT or SAT if they're remediation free, which you could see there as one of our highest performing areas for our students. They must have a qualifying score on 3 or more AP or IB exams. Military enlistment, apprenticeship with acceptance being 18 years or older, pre-apprenticeship completion, apprenticeship completion, the achieved proficiency on 3 or more technical assessments in a single career pathway, and finally the Ohio Means Job Readiness Seal, along with 250 hours of work-based learning within that job. So to talk through a little bit of scenarios here. First off, military enlistment. I do want to note that there were some concerns across several districts that we've talked with, as we did have some students that enlisted in the military. With that said, the state requires that we prove that the student has indeed enlisted in the military to get their military seal for part of their graduation requirements. However, the state actually requires that we report that in a different platform, in a different area, to count for this measure. And so all those students absolutely did enlist. They absolutely have the proof of that. We did not have the report in the right place. And again, this is a new measure, so lesson learned on some things from this. I will also note here that the state has, as part of these 11 areas, the apprenticeship with acceptance being 18 years or older. So our students must be 18. This is post-high school, so this is if they've graduated. So one questions, how exactly do you report a measure of students who are 18 and have graduated when you are to be reporting it at the end of the school year? So obviously there would be a very tight window where this would have to be reported within. Also, the apprenticeship completion, there, to our knowledge, is not one student across the state who has made this measure, because completing an apprenticeship happens well after high school. Most apprenticeships are 2 or 4 years. And so there is no way for a student to meet this measure. The state has recognized that, and they've shared that with our college career readiness staff. And specifically then, I hope they make some changes. I will say Matt Meisner, who may be out there now, and Matt has actually shared with me that they had multiple conversations with the state, multiple college career readiness advisors and directors and supervisors and coordinators. They have had conversations with the state in advance of these measures and did share these kind of tidbits of information as to potential changes. Unfortunately, there were 0 changes made from the feedback that they gave to the state. So now that the results are in on some things, my hope is that we certainly hear from the state some potential changes that do occur in this area. But I want to highlight a specific scenario that was pretty common as we looked at students who did not meet one of these areas in particular. So one of our students that we actually had in the district who did not qualify of being college career ready had a 3.65 GPA, successfully completed 2 business pathway courses, but in the state's eyes you have to have 3, successfully completed 2 AP courses, but in the state's requirements you have to have 3, and successfully completed 2 college credit plus courses, earning 6 college credits. But in the state's requirements, you have to have 12 college credits. So had the student taken 1 more AP course instead of a college course, or 2 more college courses instead of the 2 AP courses, they would have counted on the measure. So this scenario was fairly common as we reviewed students who did not count on the measure. We are hopeful that the state will review these issues many districts face with this measure and ensure that students who are truly ready for their path beyond high school are accounted for in this measure.
And I just want to echo what Mark pointed out earlier, that we did give this feedback, the superintendent's groups as well. I know Matt's group, we all gave this feedback on the front end. We're very fortunate in Westerville to be able to offer College Credit Plus courses on our campus, and I shared with the board previously, we had 4,372 credits earned last year. And so part of the reason that number is so high is because we do have College Credit Plus on campus. A lot of our kids choose to take a mixture, whereas in some districts, they don't offer CCP in-house. If a kid wants to take it, they have to drive themselves to a college campus, and so they might have more AP classes because that's all that's available. So we're actually giving more opportunities, diversifying those experiences for our kids, and getting penalized on the measure as a result.
Can I just repeat that? Because we're providing opportunities, we got penalized, right? Because we have different tracks, CCP, AP, IB. So when students are picking and choosing from that menu of options, it actually hurts us here.
That is correct. So because of the robust options that are for our kids, and the college career ready or CCP courses are an expectation of the state. Now, we do not have to offer those on campus. We do offer those on campus because we believe that it really will have more students who participate and students who can earn college credit to prepare them for those next steps. The AP course offerings as well, same idea, some advanced coursework to prepare students for their future. But a student who takes a combination, as we see with this example, which was pretty common of our students who did not meet the measure, we see here that that actually did penalize us. And at the end of the day, I would still support and fully encourage that our students take the selection of courses that fit them and prepare them for the future, even though that may result in a 2-star rating for our district in this area. And I have a feeling that some others feel the same way.
And Mr. Cooper, while you're on that, could you clarify that if this is not weighted on a cumulative score? That example you just provided, that, for instance, is not weighted, like as a cumulative score, correct?
When you say weighted, are you speaking to?
How are all those, when you're putting that into the rating system, how is that actually weighed in comparison to everything else that they're looking at for that student?
Yeah, so this student would not count at all for the measure. So when we look at that 2-star rating, this student didn't count in the rating. So if multiple students who were taking combinations, so if the state allowed for 2 AP and 2 college courses as opposed to 3 or 4, if they allowed a combination of a certain amount, that would be one suggestion absolutely we would make to the state. My guess is that we did make such suggestions to the state because we knew that students do take a combination of the courses to prepare them. Our hope is that parents, in meeting with their students and talking through what pathway they want to take and how parents can encourage their kids to make the right choices of courses, and that they meet with their teachers and their counselors, that we create the best path for that student, for that individual student. And so with that said, again, it may not meet the state measure, but we're confident that this student is ready for college, career, and or the workforce or military.
And I know when you have Mr. Meisner come up, he's very passionate about this. I'm sure he'll talk more about it. But I know our pathways were designed intentionally to incorporate different types of courses. And so again, we've done what we think is a good thing for our kids, but the state's not recognizing. I would argue that that's a more robust experience than a kid just taking random classes versus in a pathway where they're linked into an interest area to prepare them.
So many things that have gone through here, many measures, many things learned. We certainly have areas, and we will own the fact that we will never be perfect with our kids. We will never be 100% in everything. And so we will continue to strive to improve and support our kids in preparing them for their future. We will work with our families to ensure that they feel that their students have what they need to be successful. But at the end of the day, in closing, I do want to note that despite the many challenges we face, whether that is a continued loss in state funding, whether that is unfunded state mandates that require the district to continue to make ongoing changes to curriculum and operations of the district, or whether we look at the challenge of continually changing metrics on how our schools are measured, that WCS, this district remains a strong district serving our students, families, and community. We believe that all students are capable of learning at high levels, and it is our collective job in this community, not just the district, but this entire community, to help them, every one of our students, to reach their full potential. For some students, it may take some time. It may take more time. It may take additional support or alternative methods of learning. But every individual student in this district is important to us, and we want to make sure that they know that they belong here. Our student success is all due to the teachers, the bus drivers, the paraprofessionals, the secretaries, the food service workers, our custodians, our administrators, and every individual volunteer and staff member working with our district and their families to help every student grow and feel like WCS is truly where they belong. And so with that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I think this is really reflective, right, of how impossible it is to compare where we were 10 years ago to where we are here because of just the changes that they made in just 1 year, right? And so when we look back and look at, 2015, it could look drastically different, and it will look different next year too. So I think it's a really good reminder that this is a snapshot. It's one data point, and I know we're going to talk about more data points here in a minute, but it's just something that I've continued to hear out in the community is let's look back and why is it not adding up? And so this is really why.
Yeah. Changing metrics, changing assessments. Again, I noted earlier here another assessment that may or may not change because the state will tell us what we can choose from an approved vendor list. So tests and metrics and measurements and expectations and goals, they all change over time. And so it's very difficult to look back even a few years. Again, that star rating went into place in 21-22. That was just a couple years ago. Before that, there were letter grades. Before that, there were certain ratings of components. Before that, it was designated as districts with distinction or certain expectations that were met or not met, the performance indicators. And so if you look back just 10 years within this district, across the state for that matter, I should say, the report card has changed drastically.
Thank you. I just have, you brought it up again, so I have a follow-up question circling back to this mandate about how we may be changing. We may have 5 approved assessments. And so I'm wondering, and you may not know this, but how much could that potentially cost us if we needed to switch to a new assessment? And I do believe it was already mentioned by Ms. Hamburg. I can't imagine we'll actually get any funding to be able to do that, but I could be wrong.
It would depend on the specific assessment. And so right now there are about 12 to 15 assessments that you can choose from. So again, the state will determine which those are. And potentially, once the state decides which 5 or potentially 2 or even 1, my guess is that those assessment vendors may choose to change their prices as well. And so that's a possibility, a real possibility. So it is really hard to know what exactly that number is going to be.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I really appreciated this. I felt like it was very informative, and that was a lot of math, and I think very difficult to follow. But I'm going to ask you a very loaded question, so bear with me.
Sure.
So I think just given what you've explained to us, when we look at a component area like college, career, workforce, military readiness, which we know is new, as you've mentioned. And we know that our district, for example, we're only able to give kids these technical career opportunities because of these external partnerships with Columbus and Delaware. And that's how they're able to gain these very important experiences while they're in our buildings. Would you say that it is, I don't want to say impossible, because we keep saying it's very extremely difficult for districts like ours to earn those 5 stars because of these constant changes to the measures. And I think we just wouldn't be fairly rated in a category like this because, as you just shared, that goalpost keeps changing. All these factors are at play here. Because I think a lot of times when folks are online and they're seeing, they didn't get the 5-star, they didn't get the 4-star. But again, you have a very specific example like this. This is a new category that was added. We know absenteeism was also added. How can districts like ours, is it fair to expect us to earn a 5-star in these areas when we know that these changes just keep coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, great questions, and I'll give Matt Meisner an opportunity to respond if he has anything to add to this. First off, I would say, I think, for example, when we look at some districts around us, some high-performing districts that may have even had 4 or 5 stars in the college career readiness component, some of those districts offer CCP because they're required to by law, but they don't offer them on campus as we do. And so students who may be interested in the college course may not take it because they have to drive somewhere to take that course. And so they might take an AP course or additional AP courses because of that. And so they meet the measure because of that. But one could argue, is that what's best for the student, that they took additional AP courses that may or may not be related to their career path, because really that was their only option, that they didn't have the choice to travel off campus for things. Another point that you mentioned on there, just overall, is it fair to think that districts can get here? I think there absolutely are measures in place because we want to continue to improve. I think there's absolutely validity in some of these pieces of data that we want to continue to look at and reflect on and determine how can we get better in serving our students and ensuring that they are prepared for the future. With that said, I think there are questions about specifically what those measures are. These are not locally determined measures. They are determined by the state themselves as to what they believe are measures that are important to them. And as we can see, there may be some measures that we say, hey, look, we have certain offerings in our district that we want to continue to offer those options for our kids. And it may come at the expense of having a lower star rating on something, but we believe locally that is what's best for our kids. And so, fair question, there are certainly some things we can take and learn from, and we will own that. I don't think any staff member out here is saying, yeah, I'm just going to dismiss all that and we'll just move on and see what happens next year. We are absolutely owning this data and taking it and learning from it and saying, what can we do differently? But also at the end of the day, some of these measures we might say, you know, at the end of the day, that's not important to us because we recognize by doing some of these things that are best for our kids, we might not meet that measure. Mr. Meisner, I don't know if you have anything else more to add on the career technical piece.
Yeah, good evening. I just wanted to add, yeah, certainly we can get to a 5-star. I don't think that that's impossible. But I will say, just talking to my colleagues across the region, across the state, what we offer in Westerville is sort of like the gold standard, right? A mixture of IB, AP, CCP. Our kids, second part of that measure, and Mark Cooper and I talked about this, is actually following up on where our kids at after they've graduated from high school. That does not factor into the report card, that's a report-only measure. But we exceed the state average in every single one of those categories. More of our kids go on and enroll in college 2 years after they've graduated by 15% more than the state average. Our kids graduate with a college degree within 6 years, which is the measure, about 10% higher than the state average. Our kids are enlisted and attending Ohio Technical Centers, about 5% more than the state average. So we are sending our kids off to do great things. And that example that Mr. Cooper shared, this is a student I dug into. This student right now is attending Ohio State University. They're in a degree program, they're being successful, and they're also employed part-time. So that tells you that our kids, even though they're not meeting one of these measures, they are going off and doing great things after they graduate from us. And Ms. Liban, I wanted to answer your question about because I think I know where you're going with how do they factor into the measure. So student factors in once they've hit one of these triggers. They don't count for multiples. So let's say we have a student that gets 12 college credits, they also do a pre-apprenticeship, they also complete an industry-recognized credential. They show up in all the graphs that Mr. Cooper just showed you, but they actually only count one time on the report card. Once they've hit one measure, that's it. We don't get 2, 3, 4 points for kids that are factored in. So that student did not factor in any one of those categories, therefore they didn't equate on our report card. Yeah.
So I had a follow-up question to that. So I see our portrait of a graduate, right? And I see social emotional wellness, collaboration. And then I turn over to how the state assesses what a portrait of a graduate should be. And I don't see social emotional wellness, collaboration. So, you know, I'm sort of at a loss here when we put these things together that the community decides upon, that outside groups decide upon this, what makes a solid graduate, or this makes one of our graduates, college, career, workforce, and military ready. These are the things, and the state says, but we want these things, and they don't show up on a metric. How do what's our objective to balance that, or is to my colleague, is that just kind of always a little out of reach for us because there's no assessment point, no data point on here for that?
Yeah, great question, and I think you alluded to potentially some of the answers, and that is, really what our board expects for our district. You are the elected officials that help to guide our administrative team on what you feel and know that our community wants. The portrait of a graduate is a great point that you make here because our community developed that portrait of a graduate. We had multiple business members, we had parents, we had staff members who contributed to this portrait of a graduate just a few years back. This is still relatively new. And so with that said, we chose as a community what we wanted for our students when they graduate from Westerville City Schools. And so these may be some skill sets, and I would argue are some skill sets that aren't necessarily measured through an assessment. And so with that said, I think it's really just taking in the results and saying, okay, here are the results. What can we take and learn from these results? And which of these areas do we feel like, hey, we're doing the right thing for our community? And we can just recognize that that may not come through a 4 or 5 star in certain areas. But at the end of the day, we are still performing extremely well. Our staff members and our kids are doing a great job.
And just to shift gears, because I know this data doesn't, the state looks at their objectives in kind of a vacuum and pick out the data points that they like, and then they show them to us, and we go, okay. But there is one here with the English language arts achievement that I wanted to just touch on real briefly.
Yep.
I'm sorry, my chart here is black and white, so I'm not sure what sections we're talking about, but it looks like we have 2 demographics in particular that are a little outside of where we wanted to be in terms of meeting those objectives. I'm curious if that's a resource issue, an allocation issue. Is it, I mean, I know our demographic is extremely diverse, and I can't see which ones those necessarily are, but I was curious what our plan was, maybe in particular with these English language arts learners to close that gap a little bit of what that might look like.
Yeah, good question. And actually, as we look at these specific measures to the English language arts, if I'm looking in the same spot as you on that assessment, are you looking at the bottom graph? The bottom bar.
Yeah, so it looks like this for me, and I can't.
So I'm sorry, I saved
okay.
on some color ink, but I will note that specific bottom bar correlates to our students with disabilities, and so they didn't quite meet the mark. They were very close to meeting that gold circle, and then the other area, that green bar, which is the 4th bar down, is our Asian or Pacific Islander group that did not quite meet the benchmark expected from the state's goals. So our students who are English learners did meet the benchmark that's expected by the state for that area. They are noted, it's a little hard to see, but I believe it's that beige line, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th bar down on that list.
So our students with disabilities and our Asian or Pacific Islander learners,
Correct.
Is that a matter of resources for us? Is it a matter of curriculum? I mean, what are we looking at here to help close both those gaps?
Yeah, good question. I think from the general education standpoint, I think it may just be looking at where those students did not show performance. I think from the students with disability standpoint, we're constantly looking at that measure as to how can we better support our students. It is a big job. Our teachers that do that work have a very big job in supporting each of our students with disabilities. And I think it's, again, it's very close to that measure. I think year to year, we're really looking at how can we just get them to that point of being proficient in the state's eyes. On the math assessment, I think our only area that did not meet also was just our students with disabilities. I say just, but that was the only of the 11 different categories there. Or 9 different categories there. And so once again, from a resource standpoint, we have seen a growing number of students with disabilities across our district. And that is where we have continually added staff over the last few years. When we talk about an area of staff increasing, you may see an overall reduction of enrollment across the district. But when we see our student population of students with disabilities that show that they need more intensive support, we do add staff members. And I believe we've added about 20 to 30 staff members over the last few years, specifically in supporting our growing enrollment. It has grown by leaps and bounds, the number of students with disabilities.
Has the state raised the bar on what is expected of students with disabilities? Is that a part of us trying to close that gap, or has that standard remained relatively the same and we're just trying to have the resources necessary?
So depending on the assessment, yes, some of those measures are continually changing. So when I spoke to that 3rd grade reading subscore, our students with disabilities are taking that 3rd grade test. And so 48 was a passing measure last year for the proficiency in reading, it is now a 50. And so that benchmark is continually growing. And so we will continue to work to meet that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I add one thing, Mr. Cooper? I'm back here.
I'm sorry.
In the dark.
Where did that voice come from?
I know. I'm just going to add one thing to your question about the Portrait of a Graduate. So every single day, I talk to businesses in our community. We're trying to fill the employment gap. We're trying to get kids and young people into careers. And no business ever has asked me what the web exam scores are for a student. No business ever has asked me, did you report their military enlistment in 2 different platforms on the state website correctly? But what they do ask me is, can the kids solve problems? Can they communicate? Can they collaborate? So I just want to make that point that hopefully the state will also listen, because I know our business partners, I've got some of them fired up about this as well, that they're going to be providing input to the state to say, what you're measuring is not even what we're looking for. If the end goal is that our kids are employed, what are we measuring to make sure that they're ready to do that? It's not their web exam scores. It's not where their military enlistment's gone. It's can they do those 6 skills that we have in our portrait?
I think that touches on the social emotional skills, right? Like being able to collaborate with somebody, work in a team, and work with difficult people, or flex when those people have different learning styles or work styles.
I have a question about the assessments, that we have to, it's going to be up to 5, right?
Yes.
How will we vet those and make a decision? Can you talk that through?
Yeah, good question. Again, this will be a conversation that we have throughout this year as we explore what are the assessments that are out there being used that could be potentially one of those 5, or again, maybe just 2 or 3 that are accepted. But then from there, we actually, again, Kate Tome will be presenting here in just a few minutes and speaking specifically to our MTSS work and how we utilize that data. But I'll ask Kate if you can kind of speak to that in just a bit as well on the assessment.
But just so I just want to make it absolutely clear, we're just looking at these other assessments. We're not going to make a decision until we hear
Right.
back from the state.
Yes, absolutely. We cannot make a decision until we know what the state is going to approve for those assessments. Hopefully, again, it'll be well before that June 30th deadline. There have been moments where the decision has not been made until past the deadline, I should say. And again, it puts us into motion very quickly in having to make a fast decision.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add to probably state the obvious, but it's also an extra stressor on our staff then as they're trying to start the year and trying to learn a new system. And so that cramped turnaround time that they've given themselves a very long window to decide what the assessments will be, they're giving us a very short window for our staff to try to do that as they're already busy trying to form relationships and do all the things that we need to do at the beginning of the school year.
Excellent point, and I think about the professional development that's needed to assess and learn a new assessment potentially that the staff members haven't been using before. So absolutely. There are very tight timelines on things, and so we will just continue to do what we can to ensure that we have measures in place to support our staff so that our staff members can continue to support our kids.
So I just want to underscore one other thing you said. So excused absences also count towards those 10 days, right? And
10%, just
Okay.
to check that, yeah.
Oh, thank you, 10%.
Uh-huh.
But so do excused absences count towards those 10 days in law, right? That, and then you get called into the office
Yes.
to put forward a plan of how you're going to make sure your students. So if you're taking a vacation and you miss 5-7 days and then your child gets sick or you have a medical thing, whatever it is, that still counts towards those 10 days of being absent.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry I corrected you a little early on that one. But yes, the 10%. And with the measure for chronic absenteeism is 10%. I think you're maybe speaking to some of the House Bill 410 from a few years back on the days and the number of hours. And so along with that, yes, to your point, any absence counts as an absence. With that said, the state is also looking at some additional requirements for districts to put in certain interventions. So the reporting requirement to the state will not have to happen on certain things because the state, I don't know if has the resources to support what they need to support. And so more of the expectations are coming on districts of intervening earlier. And so part of the state's expectations to go to that 5% chronic absenteeism number by 2030-31 school year is that they are putting more measures on local school districts to have to intervene earlier. And so we will apologize in advance, parents that are out there, for the communication coming home. In many cases, again, again, we recognize if your child is sick, we want your child to stay home. If you are going through a family experience for a trip that is truly educational, we want you to, wherever possible, schedule that outside of the school year. But we also recognize the value of that and the right for a parent to make a decision on what they feel is best for their kid. In the same token, we recognize that we will have to communicate with you more because the state is putting that requirement on local districts to communicate more frequently and earlier because they're at risk of hitting that 10% mark on the overall chronic absenteeism for the year.
Just to follow up with that, this is a very specific question, but I'm just, so if a student takes a college visit to be college and career ready,
Correct.
as a junior or senior,
That is
that
correct.
counts towards their chronic absentee statistic. Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to make
That,
sure I was
that excused
understanding
absence
that
for a college
correctly.
visit does count against them. And again, if they then reach 10% of the school year, so to put that into perspective, about 175 days in service for kids, 178. So if they miss 18 days
Yep.
worth of hours, so if a student misses a half day for a doctor's appointment, that's a half day toward the overall 18 days for the school year. So if you take 2 days per month on average, that would be meeting the expectation or beyond the expectation to then count as a chronic absentee student.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I actually have, I think, one other question. Hold on, I have to get back to a particular slide here. Well, let me just ask this big question. So, private schools, non-public charter schools where, students receive voucher money to go, not the same report card, correct?
So there isn't
Yeah.
a report card
Okay.
to that point.
Thank you. Yep, thanks.
I might just ask if we're able to, I know we post the whole board meeting up online, but I'm wondering if we can cut this snippet out and just post it so people can, like if they're looking to try to understand the report card and they weren't able to come tonight, they can go straight there and just get the information and listen to this.
Yeah,
Oh, great, thanks.
absolutely.
And I don't have a question, but I really do just want, because I think a lot of times we get too bogged down on the negatives and the, what ifs. But I think we really should applaud ourselves that we've been able to make progress and improve on addressing chronic absenteeism since COVID-19. We know right now the needs of our kids, just based on the demographic of our student populations, every child is not the same. And so whether it's putting in place interventions or working with parents to meet the needs of that whole child, we're really doing everything that we can as to make sure that that kid is able to thrive in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So I just wanted to really let you know I appreciate this presentation, but just in the grand scheme of things, that's a huge accomplishment, I would say.
A lot of things to certainly a lot of things to celebrate throughout this, and we could certainly cherry pick the data and just want to show you the great things, just as some may choose and cherry pick the data to show the negative things. From our standpoint, we take all things, we look at everything, we own the data, we take what we can learn from the data. We also recognize the pieces of data that just don't fit with what we expect for the students in Westerville City Schools.
Thank you. Really appreciate our continual improvement mentality too.
Sure.
If there's no other questions, we're going along to MTSS report, which I'm hoping Ms. Toma will also give us.